Welcome back to Sakura Zoo, everyone. My name's Gunter, and it's time to welcome the new Pallas Cat to our zoo. As we build, you may notice some new things in the background. I'm actually skipping ahead a week to welcome our new DLC animal. This does mean that the original episode, which I'm not going to spoil just yet, is already ready to go though, so keep an eye on our community updates for some upcoming sneak peeks. Now we're diving right into this build, and you may have already noticed, I've grabbed two items from our mystery habitat that we haven't quite shown just yet. First, we have our modern glass barrier, which really makes sense for a Japanese zoo. They are very modern when it comes to architecture. And the second one was this really interesting looking white wall, which I found out are actually called adobe walls. The benefit of these walls is that they provide that same Japanese architecture that we use in our binturong habitat. A lot of that white and black color scheme. For this wall, I did add in some dry stone to help offset all of that white, and it really helped to tie this habitat together with the rest of the zoo. You are probably going to notice these walls popping up from quite a few places as we develop Sakura Zoo. With that out of the way and the basic rough size of our habitat set up, it's time for us to work on the interior. This is no different from many of my other builds either. Today we're starting off with some of our faux rock. I'm a huge fan of faux rock and habitats, I think I've mentioned that before, and you can actually see me utilizing a lot of natural rocks this time as well, and there's actually a really good reason for this. I use faux rocks quite a bit in places where you're really not going to find that perfect natural rock outcropping. And in this case, the back of the habitat makes sense right now. But as we start working on the interior of the habitat, we actually have more freedom so we can utilize more of these realistic rocks. And in this case, you can see I'm making a little rock bridge propped up with a tree underneath it. And honestly, I love the way that this looked. While we continue to work on the habitat, think about showing some appreciation for these grumpy little cats by hitting that like button. Now, similar to our binturongs, we also need some names for our new cats. We have one male and one female, so make sure to leave some suggestions in the comments below. In fact, we've already gotten some fantastic name suggestions for our binturongs, and we're going to go take a quick visit over to them shortly just to check in on how they're doing. Now, getting back to our build with a second, much higher glass barrier, which is going to help separate our guests from our Pallas cats, it's time for us to really start focusing on the interior with some foliage work. I'd actually started working on this habitat before I even had access to the DLC, which means that I'm actually building blind right now. And you can always guesstimate what an animal might need from a habitat, which is exactly what I did here. But sometimes it's worth it for you to be a little bit more aware of what your animal is to help build that perfect realistic habitat. So on that note, the Pallas cat is actually the world's smallest cat. It's actually even smaller than most of our domestic cats as well. So keeping this in mind, I wanted to make sure that our foliage was really sparse. I can add in some really cool things, but I need to make sure that there's a lot of space for our Pallas cats to wander. I'm not going to be covering everything with foliage because when we do that, our guests may not be able to see anything, and we really don't want that to happen. Next, we know that the Pallas cat is perfect for colder weather. They have this really fluffy fur which acts as a great insulator for harsh winters and freezing temperatures. This tells me that we're going to focus more on the taiga and temperate foliage than anything else right now. Because they're so small, they're also the perfect ambush animal. And to help give them that opportunity to ambush, I'm placing down a lot of different broken sticks and debris, giving them that ability to climb up and to hunt. Now, I realize in Planet Zoo, they may not actually have that animation, and they also don't have anything to ambush. We're not going to add in any other live animals here for them to reenact that. So instead, we're just going to go with some implied ambush areas. Now, there's two ways that we can create some implied ambush areas, and we're going to be utilizing all of these faux rocks that we placed earlier in the build. In order for them to get access to these higher areas, we also need to place down some climbing structures. And I'm doing something a little bit different than I've never really done from a climbing structure perspective. And I will admit, I'm not very good when it comes to building climbing structures. And I actually think a lot of people struggle with that. So today, what I'm doing is making something super basic. One line that's going to traverse from one side of the habitat to the other. But to make sure that I don't have to keep on going back and adjusting all those logs, I'm going to use the longer piece to make sure that it's connecting with the next support beam, and then swapping them out for smaller pieces so I don't have to go worry about repositioning them later. Now I realize though that it's fairly plain looking, and in order to add a little bit of extra flavor to it, we're going to use the same technique from the binturongs. And really, all that means is creating a platform for them to utilize and climb on. This is actually the perfect way for us to give them those implied ambush areas, where they can jump down and practice being those ambush animals. Lastly, Pallas cats are perfect diggers. And this is actually something I didn't realize when I was building this habitat. Because they're so skilled at digging, they actually utilize burrows as their main shelter and to help raise their young. So because I didn't realize this, I failed to actually add a burrow. But I do circle back and add this burrow off camera. Instead, today we're going to focus on the backstage area. Now, a lot of the backstage elements we're utilizing are actually coming from a previous build that you haven't quite seen just yet. So again, that mystery build is coming up, but you're going to see it eventually, I promise. With the habitat coming together, I built the back walls up with some higher plaster. Originally, I was going to go with more of a concrete look before I realized it just didn't look ideal for those ambushed animals who typically live in a mountainous region. So to help symbolize this, I'm going back through and then overlaying all of the plaster panels with rock cladding. And this actually worked out really well to create a more natural looking environment. And it also adds to the idea of a more realistic build. Or I like to think so at least. And this is where I need your help. Share feedback on what you thought of this particular build, be it good or bad. I also want to say thank you for all of those positive comments in our first episode of Sakura Zoo. And welcome to the community as well. And if you've just landed here on this episode, think about joining in by subscribing. But as always, remember that there is no pressure to do so. I actually took a lot of feedback from the community on hiding some of these cladding pieces as well. I get it, the tops of these really have come out quite jagged and they really didn't fit with the theme of having something modern and clean looking. So instead, I'm taking the time to utilize something new I've never done before. I'm adding in some wood pieces, colored in off black to create a runner that I can use to help hide everything. It's the perfect way to cap off this habitat wall. Now, I think this is the perfect time for us to check in with our binturongs real quick. I'm really excited to welcome Salt and Caramel, our female and male binturong, to Sakura Zoo. And surprise, we have one new addition to the family, Toffee, our new baby binturong. I do want to say thank you so much to Draconic Apologies for the fantastic name suggestions. Now, with just a few minor changes, such as sinking in some chain link barriers into our adobe walls, the exterior of our habitat is complete. So we're going to switch gears really quick. It's time to help build up our guest path, and what better way to do that than with a Tory Gate? Tory Gates often signal the transition between the mundane and the sacred. And honestly, what a way to help guide our guests to our new habitat. Now, to build this up, there was nothing fancy about it. And sometimes you really don't need fancy. I started with the Asian painted timber columns. These actually act as the perfect base and top for our Tory Gate. And then I added in a few planks to add some additional surface area that we're going to utilize later. I also opted for a more tame brown wood color, giving it that not quite aged look. And after a bit of looking, I added in a few African ropes and finished it off with some timber brackets. Now, I will admit I had to finagle a little bit. I tried a few different things because sometimes that's what you gotta do when you're building in Planet Zoo. For me, building this Tory Gate was the first time I've done it. But once I had it in the right place, I actually went back over and added in some additional foliage, as well as extending our adobe walls to help mask our staff entrance. I especially love the pink that kind of leads into that whole Sakura Zoo feeling. And with that done, it's time for us to start focusing on the backstage area. And there's not a whole lot on the backstage area for this build, more so because you're going to see a lot of the pieces come together in the next episode. Which I get it, really weird, and I totally understand. Instead, we're focusing on this little hatch. And a lot of the times when I was looking up videos on Pallas cats, trying to get a good feel for what their backstage would look like, there was one overarching thing that I always noticed, which was like a little door to help slide in food into this backstage den. So, utilizing some brackets, and when I say some, I mean a lot of brackets, I was able to make this really cool looking black door. And I kind of have a new appreciation for how brackets can be used to make some pretty interesting small surfaces. In fact, I actually think it's the smallest piece that provides you a lot of room to utilize them in really cool ways. I actually built a door once out of them, which was a futile gesture in trying to make something pretty cool looking. Now, that out of the way, it's time for us to focus on adding a little bit of flavor to the back wall here. It was looking kind of bare, and let's be real, when you go to a backstage area, no space is left unused. Space is a premium often, so keeping that in mind, I added in a shelf. Tons of stuff went into the shelf. I'm going to focus on a few things. The tea boxes, conservation buckets, all of this really helps to bring the entire build together. Now, we are coming pretty close to the end of this build, and I just want to say thank you to everybody who's watched this video. I really appreciate your support. You've helped to make this zoo amazing, the best one yet. And I think that's fitting, considering I've learned so much playing Planet Zoo, and trust me, I'm not leaving anytime soon. We're going to see so much of Sakura Zoo. I can't wait to see what we put together. As always, if you have feedback, leave it in the comments below. Let me know what I could have improved, because that's how you become better at playing Planet Zoo. And I think this is a perfect example. I picked up this idea from Simply Zoological, and I loved it. I always found that the concrete acted as a perfect floor, but sometimes you just looked too clean. So I add some grunge, color match it to your floor, and you have the perfect dirty floor for your backstage. And you can see this here in these final shots. And that means, with these final cinematic views, the episode is done. If you've really liked it, think about subscribing, think about hitting that like button, leave some comments below. And lastly, don't forget, we're always on the lookout for some names and working with you guys, the community, to create this awesome zoo. So leave some name suggestions in the comments as well. As always, thank you again. And of course, ciao for now, everybody.